Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian from Sports Info Solutions, joined by the Football R&D Jamboree, Alex Vigderman, Bryce Rossler, and James Weaver. Alex, you held down the fort last week while me and Bryce were in Indy. It sounds like it was a more intelligent episode than when I'm around. There was that air of smart that I just don't have.
You can choose to use the word smart. There are other words that other people might choose.
All right. And James, what do you have to say for yourself in bringing the intelligence to last week's episode?
I just sat back, watched, ate some popcorn, and listened to a very, very good conversation about how to put together a solid defensive line from some very smart people.
Yeah, I thought students from UPenn were sharp, especially in their openness with when they sat down to try to win the case competition, they figured out how to make a good presentation and really based their research around what would be presentable at the end and knew that from the beginning. To me, that was the coolest part of sort of listening back to that one.
I do think that that's like a measure of experience. Not necessarily, so like one of the participants had done it before, but also just like being in a school that has like programs like this that competes in these kinds of competitions, like knowing.
Don't make this about Penn being good.
No, well, but there's plenty. I mean, that part of it is true of several of the teams, right? Like Syracuse was running the competition; they had multiple teams. I'm sure that they have a lot of support in that respect as well. I do think that's a piece that is like an experience value where you get a little bit of prep that helps you present well.
No doubt about that. I will also say from the adjunct professor side of things, for as many times as you can try to teach lessons like that, for them to execute against that idea as well as they did, it really blew me away. And I think that was what set them apart. Bryce, how you doing? Have you recovered from the combine yet?
No, not quite.
Was that your first combine?
It was indeed my first combine. It was fun. It was good seeing all my friends in the industry. The days were super busy and I had to adjust my sleep schedule a little bit because, as you know, I'm not an early riser. But it was good. As far as like a trip out of town for work with 10 hours of meetings all day can be, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't get to do the fun stuff. I didn't get to watch people run around and bench press an absurd amount of weight and all that stuff. But
I don't know. You hit the Shahashkaria, right? You hit like, which spot was it that you ate dinner at the last night?
Fogo de Chao?
Fogo de Chao. That sounds like that sounds like a pretty fun time. You think that running 40-yard dashes is more fun than that? Or watching people run?
It was a pretty fun time, yeah. But I don't necessarily know that is representative of quote unquote the combine necessarily.
Well, my friend,
it's a restaurant in Indianapolis, like
14 combines in. The combine is a restaurant. It's a restaurant where Jerry Jones is drinking, where Sean Payton's stumbling in with a new girl. That is the combine.
Something about shrimp cocktail.
I did not make it to Elmo's.
Well, that's
I was missing out.
Yeah, rookie mistake for you, I guess. I managed to have it twice over the course of time that we were there together. So, all right. Today, we are playing a little fun game today in that it was franchise tag week. A couple days ago, the various franchise tags that the deadline passed, and there were 6 franchise tags handed out and some interesting not handed out franchise tags. So we wanted to get together to play a little game today, have a little bit of a draft, go around the room and draft not just people or the players, but draft the moves in terms of the 6 players that were tagged and the 3 top players, in my opinion, that were not tagged, and take our, what we thought from best move to the worst move, go around the room and pick them out that way. What do you guys think of that?
Sounds good to me, man.
Are we doing like a 40 race to see who gets first pick? How are we doing this?
Yeah, I'm winning the race to 40 amongst us. So I'll go first. And then Alex, then Bryce, then James. We'll do it sort of
by age, sure.
Are we doing this?
That's right.
We Alex set the rules. He said closest to the 40.
Yeah. And snake seems like the right thing to do.
You want a snake?
You have to. You didn't earn. I mean, you earned.
You didn't.
Like,
yeah,
you were just flying them.
I just want the first pick and the 5th. Yeah, okay, fine. We can snake. That makes my job less exciting, but it gives me more time to poke holes in all of your picks. So I'm with it. All right, the 9 players that were tagged. No particular order. I'll read them off. Saquon Barkley got tagged for a little over $10 million. The running back number is lower. Evan Ingram got tagged for 11.3, a little bit more than the running back tag, but not by much. Lamar Jackson got tagged. These are all the non-exclusive tag, by the way, including Lamar Jackson, 32.4. So more than 3 times as much as what you're getting for Saquon, almost 3 times as much as Ingram. Josh Jacobs, again, running back, down at 10.1. Deron Payne, defensive tackle, 18.9 million. Tony Pollard.
There was a little bit of inflection there. It's just your opinion.
18.9. Yeah, I like me some Deron Payne, but 18.9. Tony Pollard, another running back. Interesting. 3 of the 6 were running backs. Him at 10.1. And then the 3 top non-tag players. I don't know if you guys saw anybody else that you'd want to add to this list, but Orlando Brown, very interesting. Not tagged by Kansas City for the 2nd consecutive year. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, not tagged. And Jonathan Jones, not tagged. So 2 defensive backs there. Those are the 9. Are we ready to go? Since I gave myself the first pick. I gave myself the first pick because I thought it was a no-brainer. I think it's an easy one. Curious to hear if anybody wants to poke holes in this. But to me, the best move is franchising Lamar Jackson. I think it's you have to do this sort of move. There was no world in which they didn't do this unless they had already signed him to a longer-term deal. Maybe we could say they should have exclusive tagged him. Maybe that would be a reason to not make this the favorite. But aside from that, I don't know. Tell me that one of these other moves is a better move than getting one of the best players in the league locked up.
So when we say move, are we just talking about the player and their value relative to the price, or are we talking about the whole ecosystem of roster management?
Well, to me, I'm saying like it would have been egregious to not tag him here, which is why I think this is the best move, because this sort of, what is it, the contrapositive? Alex, help me out here. Counterfactual, yeah. That would be the worst. That's how I'm thinking of it. You could think of it however you want to think of it. It's like the MVP. Let's not really well define it so that it makes for better conversation.
Yeah, the way that I think about this is that, one, it was a mistake not to lock him down to a long-term contract. And I think, yes, you have to tag him, but I don't know. I'm speculating here, but Lamar doesn't have an agent. He represents himself. He's had some injury scares in the past. So this will be his 2nd consecutive year without playing on a long-term contract. The value on the contract is much lower than his actual value. I would say, like, what is he, like 31, 32 million?
Yeah, 32.4. And Daniel Jones is 41 on the open market.
So the player skill to dollar amount is greatly weighed in the team's favor, but I don't know how they manage this relationship going forward.
Well, maybe they don't. Maybe they let somebody else sign him and they take the picks.
Yeah, I think I actually like the non-exclusivity aspect of it for the Ravens, which is weird. But like, I do think that being offered the opportunity to be given a offer sheet from another team gives the Ravens, A, the ability to sort of understand what market exists, and B, show Lamar what market exists if they feel really strongly that his market is less strong than he thinks. And so there is actually some value in specifically the scenario of some other team coming in and potentially offering or not offering a deal, because that's sort of information that can be used to the team's advantage to some extent.
Yeah, along those lines, if Lamar's sort of aggrievement is that he hasn't been able to test the open market and he wants the ability to make whatever he's worth on the open market, what better way to sort of, now it is sort of like you'd be willing to pay whatever you're willing to pay minus 2 first-round picks is actually the calculus that other teams would have. But from a monetary perspective, yeah, this is like, all right, see it. If it's $200 million guaranteed, I'm sure the Ravens take those picks and walk away and say, yeah, well, there was no path to happiness with him that we were comfortable with. And if not, if it's maybe 150 guaranteed, then I think it's more in the realm of they have to make a decision.
And in terms of the cost, I wouldn't think, I mean, maybe teams might think differently, but I wouldn't think that the draft pick compensation relates to it at all. It's basically the cost of a trade, and you would still pay the guy market value for the contract. Like, I'm not sure
maybe that's just me thinking about things differently. I certainly think of you have assets as a team. Those include cap space and draft picks. And look at the Osweiler deal a couple of years ago. Like, you can even trade draft picks for cap space. So
yeah, I just think that, if we're also looking at Russell Wilson, for example, like the amount of capital that was used to acquire him, and then on top of it to add the contract, like teams, it seems to me like teams aren't changing the way that the contract is structured and altering the like balance of salary for positions based on the cost to acquire.
seems to me like the Browns would have been happy paying Deshaun Watson $300 million if they didn't have to give up any assets to get him. Like,
well, I really don't want to use that contract as a comparison.
okay, so let's get off that example and use Russell.
You
Wilson
have
again.
to, right?
But
Russell
that is
Wilson,
the
I think
comparison.
They would have been willing to pay Russell even more had they not had to give up assets for him. I don't know. That, to me, that's how a smart team should think about it.
I guess what I'm saying is your willingness to pay that might be the case, but you don't need to, right? No one, the market doesn't bear that. So I don't think that while a team's theoretical willingness to pay in dollars for a player might be $60-70 million a year, like, you never actually are going to run into that circumstance. So effectively, it doesn't matter what their willingness to pay is. It's just sort of like what the market forces are. So like the going rate for a quarterback is X, and it inflates a little bit every year and whatever. But like, just because a team is just because the combination of resources that you would use to acquire and then sign a player is way beyond the current average salary for a top quarterback, doesn't mean that when faced with that decision, if you were actually giving the team the option to forego paying draft picks and just paying money, like, I'm not sure that's, well, the world doesn't actually work that way. But I guess I'm saying that no one would actually have signed a quarterback for $60 million a year acquired that way.
To me,
we know that though.
Between like preferring a trade for, if I'm the Jets, like a trade for Aaron Rodgers versus signing Derek Carr is the aspect of what I would have to trade much more so than the salary. Is that in line with what you're saying, or is that?
I'm just saying that especially because there are franchise tags and all these other things that are sort of relating to the size of contracts in the league, to have the contract size be dictated by what it took to acquire the player or what it didn't take to acquire the player feels like a problematic way of structuring contracts, if that makes sense. Like, I think the contract should exist independent of the cost that it was involved to acquire the player.
I think that's probably the agent's perspective for sure. But I just think in terms of what am I willing to pay, there's
I understand it's not particularly it's not ideal for the teams. I just think that in a collectively bargained universe, it's not going to work that way.
It's kind of to some extent it is going to work that way because because they're assets. Like I said before, like, to some extent people are going to treat them like assets.
Yeah, and I guess the existence of the Osweiler trade does mean that there's like room for arbitrage and sort of like funky choices, and even the Watson deal has a similar air of this, where you're just trying to like sort of maneuver things in such a way that you can dodge the way that contracts and trades are typically structured. So I suppose it is possible, but we haven't really seen.
It feels like sports talk radio. Like, oh, you can't trade. You telling me I can get Aaron Rodgers to trade whatever you want to get him, pay him whatever. Versus like the reality of the team, which is like, I'm trading for this player on this contract. I'm not trading for anything other than that. It's interesting. I think you have a very good point, and I think it's interesting how sort of blindsided we were by how each of us were looking at it.
Yeah,
we also don't really exist in a world where quarterbacks of this caliber hit the market, right? At least not in the
like Lamar.
Yeah,
that's rare.
Yeah.
Well,
you get like Ryan Tannehills and Derek Carrs
or you get Ryan Tannehill's, Derek Carrs in that tier, or you get the like veteran that's, the Wilson deal, a theoretical Rodgers deal, where it's like a veteran who we're not entirely sure is as valuable as you might have previously thought.
Right. But like a second contract, just like an expiring rookie deal, second contract like this is like, wait, Lamar Jackson, really?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a former MVP who, like, I do think the conversation should be had about like where we would expect him to perform in the future. Like former MVP carries a lot of weight in a way that I'm not sure that it should when he has. And part of it is that they haven't put a ton of guys around him. And we've seen that a big priority for teams is to put players around quarterbacks to get them to sort of like the next level of production. But I do think that like, I don't want to use former MVP as like a blank check type argument.
No, I'd rather use like top 5 quarterback, which if you want to say he's not top 5, then he's definitely top 10. But injury risk is a thing.
Yeah.
And the skill set, like the Cam Newton sort of aging curve is probably not yet a real concern, but like could be trending towards becoming a concern.
Well, and we've seen that over the last few years, like he has not produced
10 games in the last 2 years.
He's missed time and has not produced a ton. And you probably would want to make sure that that team around him has some help. And so if you're trading a bunch of picks and signing him to a large contract, are you in some way prevented from doing that, depending on what you already have on the roster? That said, this would also be a number. So
yeah, anybody else? Any qualms with Lamar at number 1?
We're pivoting to the Lamar Jackson podcast. No more franchise tag draft. So we're
on that note, the second pick, Alex, you're on the clock.
Yeah, so that was the obvious selection, and I don't know. I don't have a ton of confidence in my rankings for other things, so I'll pick something that might be a little bit provocative. I would take the not franchising of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, which is weird as an Eagles fan. The thing that I thought was interesting when looking through some of his numbers from the last few years is he had a really explosive start to the year, had a bunch of picks, then got hurt, but he had a little bit of like a, not as extreme, but a little bit of like a Trayvon Diggs type, allowing a bunch of completions and that sort of thing, and then having the interceptions sort of balance that out. And even with that, in terms of like the percentage of the time that he got his hand on the ball and sort of disrupted the plays, that was less than what he had been in previous years. And just in terms of like total production, total points or whatever, he's never really been that like top player. And at getting paid as a safety and for the flexibility that he potentially affords, I do think that like the price enters into it a little bit, but the difference isn't that large that it really would affect things. I think it's just more of being a little bit flashier than being sort of top flight player. I do think that specifically in this team context, it's potentially justifiable to keep him in the fold, and they might still do that. But I do think that he's a little bit of like an overvalued asset.
Yeah, he's never been a favorite of total points, so that's one thing. But I think really what I noticed about that selection, Alex, is comes back to your understanding of positional value, because of the guys that did get franchised, you had 3 running backs, a tight end, and a defensive tackle to choose from. On the not tagged front, you had a tackle, a corner, and a safety. So not tagging the safety on brand as a nice second pick there for you. Not in retrospect, not shocking at all.
Nobody's got
James, Bryce, any analysis? You're not willing to criticize your boss? Tell him.
I guess I won't go that far. I guess the Eagles are set with Bradbury and Slay and slot corners, slot corner / safeties. The value of them. Are you going to tag someone in that case where you can bring on another guy? Or even draft one that's, as you see, there's been examples of rookie slot corners and safeties that have come in and produced right away. So I think
the thing that's good. Weird about the team context is that they had a lot of starting players who are free agents. And so there might be some incentive to not tag him so that you're not like putting eggs in a basket immediately. And you have a little bit more time to sort of figure out what the market for certain players is going to be, what your plans are going to be. And yeah, not jumping on the franchise tag immediately potentially opens you up to losing a player that you might later decide to keep. But that team has a lot of decisions to make on the defensive side.
Yeah, and they've still got some good players in the secondary. Well, I guess they lose Bradbury, but Darius Slay is still there. I just don't think you can pay Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. What's this? Would he get tagged as a corner or as a safety?
Safety,
probably a safety, no? Right? Yeah. I mean, corner would be even higher number, but like, I don't think he's a player you pay $18 million a year for, $17 million a year for, whatever the tag is for safeties. Kind of a no-brainer to just let him walk, and they should get a comp pick out of him, I'd think. So yeah, I'm with it.
It's one thing that the Eagles have just done. Being the Eagles has been building up front and building up front and building up front, and not being able to pay guys on the back end sort of like goes in line with that to an extent. Alex, going to become Reed Blankenship season coming soon.
I mean, the Philly loves these kinds of random players that pop up like this. Well, I like random. I prefer random. But yeah, I small sample defensive back performance is not something I want to be relying on too much, I guess is the short answer.
Right. Okay. Very reasonable selection there. Alex, measured as always. Bryce, you've got the third pick.
This might be a little heretical because I'm an Oklahoma alum, but I'm going with the non-tagging of Orlando Brown Jr.
More anti-tags.
So from a cap perspective, this was also kind of a no-brainer because the Chiefs have something like 17 or 18 million in cap space, and the tackle tag is more than that, so they probably have to make
he wouldn't even get the tackle tag. I think he get 25% more than whatever it was last year, right? The second year with the tag in a row.
Oh, right.
It's an even elevated number. Yeah.
Yeah. And like their seventh highest paid player right now is their punter. So they would have to have made a lot of corresponding cuts to squeeze him in. And I also just don't think the performance and fit is there. I think he was much better suited in Baltimore for that type of system. I don't think the pass-heavy attack of the Chiefs suits him particularly well. Like he was tied third in most blown blocks on pass sets this year among tackles, which is not good at all. I know they passed
31 blown blocks on pass plays.
31 blown blocks. That's a lot of blown blocks. And I know he has made the Pro Bowl two straight years with the Chiefs, and I was an advocate for the move at the time, but I just don't think he's necessarily living up to his brand right now, and you would have to cut some younger cost-controlled players to make it work financially. I just don't. It's kind of a no-brainer move, but I think it was the right one through and through.
So I am a noted Orlando Brown fan, although I agree with you that he hasn't played as well. He hasn't been as good a fit here. I think that, all right, in a vacuum, I don't like your pick because to me, it's easier to say, believe it or not, I'd rather pay these running backs than not pay them and like franchising them in a 1 year. Josh Jacobs at that money, like these running backs are good. So I don't like the negativity that you're bringing to the equation. However,
this is just non-tagging fatigue because I had to follow Alex. That's all this is. There's no merit to this.
The way I think of Orlando Brown is as basically a top right tackle and a little bit a fish out of water at left tackle. It's not the ideal position for him. I know that it's the big money position, but I think he could be Lane Johnson quality right tackle.
Oh, I disagree.
And I think he's a mediocre left tackle. He's obviously a very different player than Lane Johnson. Don't get me wrong, but I think in terms of the power that he plays with and the ability, he really plays with elite size. Not just he's just like a big dude, but like he brings every inch of himself to the field. But he's just not an elite athlete. Like that's just not who he is. But I don't think he needs to be on the right side.
The thing about the left-right thing with Orlando is he will not play right tackle.
That makes it hard to franchise him here. Yes,
because his whole deal with the Ravens thing and the Ronnie Stanley thing was that he wanted to be like his father and play left tackle for the Ravens, and he wants to stay at left tackle. So I don't see if a team has plans to move him to the right. I don't see him considering them.
It's interesting. Him and Lamar Jackson, did they get drafted the same year? Both like with this like stubbornness thing that hard to argue with the way who they are as players. But so yeah, I end up kind of agreeing with you at the end of the day. I think their hands were tied. Look at their offensive line. They're built with guys like Creed Humphrey, who's going to come up for his contract, Joe Tooney, who they already paid a lot of money to. Those are the guys that they need to commit their resources towards for Mahomes rather than the tackles. At the same time, it gets really thin all of a sudden, right? We were already concerned enough about Andrew Wiley. Now, like, I don't know where exactly the Chiefs go.
I think that was my question to Bryce. What do you think the Chiefs do now at left tackle? Because obviously they're not a dime a dozen come free agency time, and then developing a left tackle from a draft perspective with the 31st pick this year would be a little tough.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they've proven that they can develop linemen.
I don't know, man. They got two really good young linemen 2 years ago.
Trey Smith was like what?
He was like a 6th-round pick, sure.
Yeah.
Drop because of injury risk, all that kind of stuff. But I'm not trying to hate on Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith. Like, those are great players that have definitely come along really well. That said, before those two guys were there, they lost the Super Bowl because of offensive line problems.
Yeah, that's true. But like James said, I don't know what you do in free agency. I think you just have to try to make it happen in the draft. I think that's your only recourse here.
And they drafted, what was his name? Prince Tega Wanago.
The Auburn guy?
Years ago. I don't know if that's somebody that they're trying to slot in there, if they just see him as a backup. We've barely seen him play in the NFL.
He's entering his 3rd year.
Yep. With a total of 55 snaps so far. All right. 4th pick in the draft. You've got some interesting picks and non-picks available to you, James. We'll kind of refresh the board here. The running backs, Saquon, Josh Jacobs, and Tony Pollard at 10.1. You've got Evan Ingram at 11.3, Deron Payne at 18.9, and you've got Jonathan Jones not being tagged for, about 20?
I'm going to go to Evan Ingram here. I think bringing him back as a top 5 tight end according to total points, that value, keeping him around the team where you have a quarterback on a rookie deal, and keeping him intact with him, Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, and bringing Calvin Ridley in the fold. Just adding weapons upon weapons for Trevor Lawrence to pass the ball around was a good play. Obviously, he had some down years with the Giants coming into the years in Jacksonville, so not signing him to a long-term deal, I think, is also a positive of this, keeping him around on the tag for 1 year and see if he can continue to produce his output. And signing him at those numbers where that's frankly probably where he stands on a production standpoint from last year, I think is a good, fair deal.
Also, I think, and this would be true for the Saquon Barkleys of the world as well, like a guy with injury history, signing him to a short-term deal feels better than signing him to a long-term deal, although I guess you could argue that the long-term deal allows you to sort of like, get through the peaks and valleys a little bit. But he had a clean 2022, had best catch rates of his career, better yards after catch. Like he had a lot of resurgence from a production standpoint. And part of that is having more competent quarterback play, but you expect that to continue if he's staying on the team. So
yeah, absolutely.
So I'm a little bit less like hot on this one. Like I'm with you on it being a lower number because it's a tight end, like compared to like a receiver. So maybe that's what's I think good about it, I guess, is what I'm saying. Like you're basically getting a receiver at the tight end number, but I think he's kind of like good enough to be a second option on your team and not really enough to be the guy. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just didn't watch enough of him with Trevor Lawrence last year because total points saw more of his snaps than I did and it liked him. But I'm a little bit like hesitant about a tight end that's neither a truly dominant receiver or a true like dual threat that can really block. But I don't know. I got to take, I'll also say like looking at some of the numbers on him, he lined up in line more than I would have thought this past year. His numbers are better than I would have expected. Just looking at things, I think they would be. You make a great point, James, about how taking him away from Trevor Lawrence seems like a really bad idea at this point. But yeah, like looking at just the usage stuff like that, though, he was lined up tight 48% of the time. That's actually more than I would have expected. So that sort of thing. The more he can be a dual threat and learn to contribute in the run game as well as the pass game, I think that adds to my appreciation of the deal.
Although it does make it so that it's less of like a receiver at a tight end price type thing. And of course, that's, when we say that, we think of like the Jimmy Graham days and whatever, and this is not the Jimmy Graham conversation. This is not that caliber of player.
Right, too. And along those continuity lines, I mean, keeping him with Doug Peterson for another year probably isn't a bad idea, who is, historically known to produce good, solid tight ends that can both block in, have impact in the pass game. So I think that's probably another aspect.
Yeah. Anytime you get these positions where it's cheaper versus more expensive to tag them, you kind of have to balance. Yeah, the more, the higher tag you costs more money, but also getting players that can do those sorts of things costs more money too. And I don't know, it wouldn't shock me if the Jaguars also tried to draft a tight end this year that could fill in this role long term rather than really have to invest long term money in Ingram, especially like you were saying, if he can't show that he can do it 2 years in a row.
This is also it's going to be his age 29 season. So,
oh, wow.
He came into the league as an older prospect, and I don't know how well that's going to age. So, keep him on a 1-year deal. I think the Jags receiving situation is still a little subpar, even with Calvin Ridley coming back from suspension. So I like it. 1-year deal. It's not a ton of money. And like James said, you keep some continuity there, and you can't really afford to lose receiving talent for Trevor Lawrence right now.
With Ridley coming back, that gives him Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones.
Marvin Jones is a free agent. Yeah, that's suspect.
Yeah. I think it's without a true one.
It's fine.
You got 16 twos, but no number ones. Always a bridesmaid, never a bride. All right, let's get back to the draft. Whose pick is it? Oh, we're going back, snaking it. So,
yeah.
James, congratulations. You get the little back-to-back.
Thanks. But I don't know. In my opinion, we're getting a pretty slim pickings with plenty of holes and flaws in all these. So,
oh, come on, guys.
I guess I'll have to go with Josh Jacobs. And I
bastard.
Why is that not easy? How is that not easy? Josh Jacobs for 10.1?
From a team perspective, though, the Raiders have so many holes to fill. To pay a running back $10 million, I feel like they can do a lot of things cheaper to fill up more holes, I guess.
That's sort of where I came in. Same. That's why I had it a little bit lower. I think that a different team context, if we felt better about where they were in their competitive window, what the quarterback was going to be,
they've got $40 million in cap space.
Yeah, but I want to know what
1 year.
Well, I know what they're going to do. What are they going to do with that cap space?
Bryce, can you go up a couple more octaves? I like that.
I'm incredulous right now, man.
I am too. I had him above Evan Ingram. I had him above not Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. No, that's probably
if James wasn't ecstatic about this pick, then he could have traded down to me.
Yeah,
I would have given.
Initially made this without a snake draft. I'm sitting right here. I don't know, Bryce. If I'm you, I'm still happy if I'm you, though. You have Tony Pollard or Saquon Barkley available.
But if you trade,
I'm never happy.
If you trade to acquire Josh Jacobs, does that mean that you now have to pay him less?
If you will.
Sorry, what? We're not. Okay.
No, the franchise tag numbers, but I do think that Josh Jacobs at that number. I don't remember if you're allowed to trade players that are on franchise tags or not, but that's like a tradable asset type number.
Yeah.
I think there's surplus value.
He's arguably the best running back in the league right now.
He definitely is. I would say he is probably. Yeah, it's just the fact of the holes in the case, and then you can bring him back, have the best running back in the league for $10 million, which seems good up front. But I don't know. I think for me, it's just the whole positional deflection of running backs, paying them in general for me just is kind of like meh. But
what are they going to do with the $10 million? What is their alternative?
Ooh,
I don't know, something better on defense, some sort of breathing, livable.
How about spending money on a position that matters, Bryce? Ever think about that?
Yeah.
What? So you sign a nickel corner or
you can upgrade quarterback for Daniel Jones.
Well, I just can't do that.
We could talk about the running back value thing all we want in a vacuum.
I really don't.
I
honestly don't feel that strongly about the running back value thing. I think it's just that the players that we're talking about here in the team context that we're talking about, I don't like as much as I might have in different circumstances.
So we're still in the me and Bryce think that these players are actively positive, helpful phase of the draft, but Alex and James, you've kind of reached the point where you're yeah,
they're fine.
Yeah.
So I guess the alternative is keep the cap space and either sign it or roll it over and try to get a comp pick out of him. So the question is Josh Jacobs and $10 million for a fourth round comp pick. It's basically a fifth rounder. I think I would rather have Josh Jacobs.
I think the argument that I would be most amenable to would be like, you acquired Devontae Adams, you're gonna put a lot of resources into building up the team this year, and this is one of those resources, and you're not going to be able to acquire a player who is better relative to his position in all likelihood. I do feel like this might just be like a lack of confidence in the Raiders. I don't know. Like,
yeah, I think this is where I fall into. Yeah.
Like, I don't know. He doesn't necessarily matter if your team is just going to be like, again. So that's why I would rather have seen, like, if this was happening at the end of an off season in which I understood the team situation more, I might feel different.
Well, yeah. If they're terrible, then they'll be running the ball a lot and they'll get plenty of mileage out of it.
But if you're terrible, you do not want to pay Josh Jacobs $10 million.
That's the argument that we want to go with here, Bryce. No, I get where you're coming from. And this is kind of like a classic positional value debate, a classic, like, I think, like, when you do numbers on players, it's very easy to be like, he's not worth that much money. Like, that's not how much a running back is worth. But then you look at the sort of the value of the asset on the open market, and that's a whole different thing from that. And the part that I think gets lost sometimes in that sort of analysis until you've been in the sort of driver's seat is you have to spend the money on somebody. Like, you literally do in the NFL rules. You have to spend to 90% of the cap. Now, you can get clever about how you want to do that, but at the end of the day, like, there aren't going to be that many people. You're not going to be able to just sign people at value rates, because you'll end up without really good players, because they're going to go at a premium because of their scarcity. So that I think that's where I come at the end of the day, which is just like, Josh Jacobs is worth that. Like, even if when you look at his like total points production, he isn't. But I'm happy with how the draft is coming along, because I have the 2 last picks, I've realized. And I want you guys to pick people that I want you to. I'm not going to tell you guys what I want you to do. I'll see how it works out until you.
So that means that you get 3 picks and we all get 2?
Yeah, although I actually get 0 picks, because of course I was going to take Lamar Jackson and then I get whoever's left.
Yeah,
fair.
All right. I guess it's swinging back around. So James got his tight end and got his running back, just like he drew it up. And it's back over to Bryce.
Give me Saquon.
Taking Saquon over Tony Pollard. What made you make that choice?
I just think Saquon's way more dynamic, flat out. I know there's some injury concerns with him, but with even money, I would take Saquon. I'm not even the biggest Saquon Barkley fan in the world. I just think he's a lot better than Pollard.
Yeah, I end up on the same side as you, minus the a lot, and acknowledging that last year Pollard had the better season, I think. But I agree, and that Saquon's a better overall player.
Saquon, well, the other thing is, like, Saquon has shown that he can produce as a workhorse, and we haven't seen Tony Pollard do that yet. Tony Pollard, to me, is still a bit of a, I don't want to say a gadget guy, but the Cowboys used him for very specific things. And
I think that Zeke gets all the dirty jobs. Is kind of
I do think Zeke gets to the dirty jobs, and Tony Pollard gets like outside zone gadget plays,
catch the ball and run in space.
Yeah, and Saquon just does everything more or less. So
I still think he's pretty good. We'll have to see where he comes off the board, because he's still available. Alex, still remaining for you is Daron Payne, not Jonathan Jones, and Tony Pollard.
So
James has left. He's protesting the results, apparently.
I'm going to go with Daron Payne.
Nice.
And
big money defensive tackle.
Yeah. This is a little bit a team context thing as well, which kind of enters into a lot of it. And you're right that I'm sort of on the I'm not sure point of my draft. But a solid player, a sort of starting caliber interior lineman pretty consistently over the last few years. He dropped a little bit from a tackle quality perspective in terms of like missing tackles, but with the other guys on that line, it's a pretty good group that can sort of build off of each other in a way that you've seen the Eagles defensive front do, where if you have a sort of critical mass of players who can be disruptive up front, they can sort of have a greater than the sum of their parts type effect. I agree that the price is a little bit high, but again, to your point, like the cost to acquire players is less relevant at the top of the distribution. And I think that he's a good enough player to at least merit being in that conversation. And when we're comparing to the other moves, like I agree with the concerns about Pollard. I also think that the team context for Pollard is really weird, and like deciding to pay him the amount that you're paying him when you're also paying Zeke is weird. So some of those factors also contribute as like disincentives to make other picks.
So, first of all, I caught that cringy critical mass defensive line pun, so I don't think you got away with that. And secondly, I know we're towards the end of this and you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, but what makes you more confident in the team context of the Commanders than you were with the Raiders? Because the Commanders are kind of floating.
Yeah,
Well,
that's fair. I think that I guess that is part of where I do feel like, whether it's positional value or that sort of thing, like building up front on the defensive side, I feel more confident in as a proposition if you're kind of in the middle than building from running back. So it's a little bit of a team structure preference, I guess. But that is a totally fair. And the other argument you can make is like those guys were all already on the team and it wasn't some like world beating defense. So like those I think are fair gripes, but I also will acknowledge that these are my less enthusiastic selections.
I'd be pumped about Daron Payne. I think he's an awesome player. I think that he entered the league as one player, but he's really developed as a pass rusher. And you see that in some of his advanced stats, not just like the total points. His sack production's obviously gone up, but his pressures above expectation has been really good the past couple of years, which takes into account where he's lining up. I don't need to tell you guys what it takes into account, but for the listeners, it's taking into account the context of what sort of situations you're being put in. Obviously, as an interior player, it's difficult to get pressures and get to the quarterback than when you're an edge player. This stat sort of reflects that. I think the way that he brings, like Alex said, the team context, what they have sort of built around their defensive line there, I think that's their team identity right now. That's like the only thing holding their team together, it seems like, for the past few years. So this is another player where, like, I don't know, maybe I'm feel like I'm like the big free spender today, but like I'm happy also to franchise him at that number. I know it's a big number, but this is a player who's worth it. And if I'm the Washington Commanders, I'm trying to pay this guy. I'm trying to get him signed up long term, because I think that's really guaranteeing this guy $50-60 million, essentially like 2.5 years of what he would be getting paid. I think that's the way that I'd want, assuming there's no injury risk that I'm worried about, different things like that. This is, to me, a franchise player. So I'm happy to tag him.
Well, and he came into the league pretty young too. So he'll only be 26 this season. He's turning 26 in May. So there's still plenty of time to get him on a 4 or 5 year extension and arguably have him in lock him up still.
Yeah, and they're gonna. I mean, they have a few of those guys on the defensive front that, including him, that they need to make long-term decisions on. So I think having them all in the building for one rodeo also could be a useful idea.
Hey, don't let those guys out of your building. They'll end up in Philadelphia. Alex would take him all too happily. All right, I am picking last. Well, I'm picking 8th and then I'm picking last, I guess, here. So I can pick which move do I like better, either tagging Bryce's favorite running back, Tony Pollard.
I don't hate Tony Pollard.
I mean, you called him, what'd you call him? A
trash human? Wow.
Fake running back?
I didn't say that.
Wait.
This is being recorded.
So I have a choice between that and Jonathan Jones not being tagged. Jonathan Jones, of 29 years of age, was the 18th ranked corner in total points last year, 14th in pass coverage. Kind of a solid year after he missed a lot of time the previous year. In terms of doing with or without him, I don't feel very strongly. I feel like they probably should have not tagged him. I'm surprised one of you guys who likes not tagging people didn't snatch him up earlier because of the absence of a player that you love. I will put tagging Pollard above not tagging Jonathan Jones. And I'll do that for the reason of, I think that Pollard has value on the open market. I think that tagging him was really a no-brainer from a Cowboys standpoint. Maybe not tagging Jonathan Jones was a no-brainer, but I feel like I have to think about it a little bit longer. So for that reason, I'd put the Pollard move there. I actually thought all of these picks, all of these players that were franchised, I thought were good picks. I was surprised, James, you took Ingram so early because he probably would have been last on my list amongst the yes, I tagged hims. I don't know, but maybe I'm just, like I said, I didn't watch a ton of him, and you made a lot of good points about his relationship with Trevor Lawrence and all that kind of stuff.
I definitely had Tony Pollard well below on the end of my list.
He's just like beyond number 9. He would be like number 10.
Yeah, like blank space, then 10.
Wow.
Is that a Pollard thing or a
No?
like okay?
It's a CQL thing.
I actually I think you could have. The thing that I might have even liked more would have been to sign him to a long-term deal where he's actually making less per year.
Yeah,
I might have been more okay.
That's a fair point.
I'm sure they tried for that, no?
Yeah, I guess that's true. I'm just saying, like, if in the universe of things that I would want from them, I actually would weirdly like to have him sign long-term and also have Zeke on, as opposed to this situation. But the thing that is nice, potentially, is that if you have another year where Zeke's in the fold, it could keep Pollard's ability to command a high salary at the next negotiation in check.
I don't know. I think we just took a weird jump to now we want to sign these running backs to long-term deals. I'm actually now.
I don't have a problem with signing them to long-term.
Yeah, I'm the hater.
I don't really.
I think it's the only way to fix up what happened.
Yeah,
Alex is okay with it as long as they sign for minimum wage.
What if you just got to pay him a lot this year, and you will understand that one of these guys will not be on your team next year, and because I think they can get off of the Zeke money that's owed next year, assuming they want to do that at that point. I don't know. You could either have Pollard the ability to franchise him again, sign him again, or draft somebody, get somebody new in there, do the whole positional value thing.
I don't know. I kind of like the franchise tagging of the running backs the more I think about it, because the big thing about giving money to running backs is that it's been multi-year contracts and they're just prone to break down at any moment. I'm also more convinced of their value than James and Alex might be, but if you can get somebody that's playing really good football in their mid-20s while they still have tread, and it's for $10 million and they're a really good player for you, I'm with that, especially considering, like we talked about when we were talking about Josh Jacobs, like what is the alternative that you do with that $10 million? Like that's not getting you a receiver anymore. Like what does that get you? Like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling? Like I would rather have a Josh Jacobs than a Marquez Valdez-Scantling.
So that's
no disrespect to MVS.
Yeah, that is a
I think it's more like, would you rather have Tyreek Hill or Josh Jacobs and Marquez Valdez-Scantling? But then I want to go back to my draft picks thing again here.
But this is a reasonable. I guess, yeah. So it's all within context, right? Like if you only had $10 million available, having $10 million is not very useful. But if you have, an additional 15 on top of that 10, then you can do that. That 10 allows you to really get somewhere. So it is a little bit contextual. Do you
NFL money's a little bit fake. You can push things around in the future, and in the it all eventually has to be accounted for. But Mickey Loomis has shown us that there's some flexibility available to you. Okay, James, you said your least favorite one was Pollard. Bryce, who would your least favorite move have been?
My least favorite.
Yeah, which one of these would you have picked last?
Probably Pollard.
And Alex, but so that means you like all of the tags, because you said you like the running back tags.
I said I like the idea of the running back tags,
but not for Pollard.
Not for Pollard.
Nice, Alex.
Weirdly, I had Saquon at the bottom.
Injury risk? What do we got?
Yeah, a mix of injury risk and also like towards the second half of the year really did not have the same elusiveness numbers. And that was from a total points perspective, he was crushed this year. And a big part of that was not having the same ability to break and miss tackles.
Sort of playing injured and the perils of playing injured.
Yeah, but that's a thing that he experiences frequently. And to be fair, like in it, I would feel better about Josh Jacobs long term than I would about Saquon Barkley long term, if we were talking about those kinds of alternatives. So like there's like tagging a guy, like tagging that kind of player might be better because your alternative I don't like at all.
I think we can all agree that Daniel Jones getting $82 million guaranteed is the worst move.
Alex really loves it.
Alex loves it.
I've already forgotten my opinion from the last time we talked about the Daniel Jones thing. So
well, you're an Eagles fan, so
I'm ready to argue. Oh yeah, that's true. In that sense, I yes, I'm in
keep
favor.
him in the division. Yeah.
Well, that was like I felt similarly about Eli Manning at the time, which was just like keep him around as long as possible. and the unfortunate
this guy's winning now. What the hell?
Yeah. The unfortunate thing is that they won 2 Super Bowls while I was saying that.
All right,
so you should be fired and not allowed to talk about football because you're an idiot.
I mean, that seems like probable cause.
What did you just fire?
Me,
Alex.
Oh, yeah. It's very likely coming soon. Alex being fired for being an idiot.
I'm usurping him. I want to raise.
Call you Bryce Rossler. Yep.
Nice.
Cringe.
All right, let's get out of here. It's been fun. I like this little game that we played today. Next week, we'll be right around the beginning parts of free agency. So we'll see if we can get some cool guests on to talk about that. And then after that, the SIS NFL draft site will be coming soon. So we'll have to get Nathan Cooper and the SIS scouting crew onto the podcast to talk about that. So we got lots of fun off-season content coming. Check out Sports Info Solutions, sportsinfosolutions.com, at sportsinfo_SIS on Twitter, LinkedIn, all that good stuff. We got tons of great content coming out. The football side having to do with the draft, but also check out Mark Simon and all the work that the guys do on the baseball side with the start of the MLB season on the way. For the SIS Football R&D Jamboree, Alex Vigderman, James Weaver, and Bryce Rossler. Our producer, Justin Stein. I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast.